The child labor auction in Galveston was ending when rancher Samuel McKinnon saw her. A frail girl of 14 with eyes that held secrets darker than the Texas night. He slapped $50 onto the auctioneer's block, a fortune for a single soul, not knowing that this broken child was the spark that would either save his dying world or burn it all to the ground. What happened next wasn't just a story of the West. It was a war fought in the shadows, a battle for the very soul of Texas, and it started with a single impossible choice. Samuel McKinnon hated these auctions. He stood at the back of the humid, crowded warehouse, the air thick with the smell of sweat and desperation. He watched the parade of children, their faces smudged with dirt and fear, being sold like livestock. The year 1887 had been cruel to Texas. Drought had baked the earth to a cracked shell, and families were breaking apart, selling their own young to factories, to farms, to anyone who could offer a meal and a roof. It was a sight that turned his stomach. At 42, Samuel owned one of the largest cattle ranches in Brazos County. The McKinnon brand was known from the Panhandle to the Gulf. But all that land, all that wealth, felt like a pile of dust in his hands. It was a hollow empire, built for an heir he would never have. 15 years he and his wife Martha had prayed for a child. 15 years of empty cradles and silent rooms had carved deep lines into their faces, deeper than any drought. The ranch hands whispered when he wasn't looking. What good is a king without a prince? What good is a man who can't even father an heir? Their words were like spurs in his side. The auctioneer's voice, slick with greed, sliced through his bitter thoughts. Next up, we have a girl, age 14, healthy and strong, they say. Been working the cotton field since she was 8. Good with animals, can even read and write some. Samuel looked up. A thin girl was being shoved onto the makeshift platform. Her brown hair was a tangled mess around a face that might have been pretty once. Her cheeks were hollow, her eyes sunken into dark, bruised-looking circles. Her dress was nothing but rags, a patchwork of sorrows sewn together. She looked like a ghost. But then he saw her eyes. They weren't the vacant, beaten-down stares he'd seen on the other children. These eyes were alive. They burned with a terrifying intelligence, darting around the room, taking in every face, every shadow, every possible exit. She wasn't a victim waiting for her fate. She was a general surveying a battlefield. Bidding starts at $20, the auctioneer bellowed. 25, a voice called from the front. Samuel recognized the man, Thomas Briggs, a small-time farmer with a reputation for working his help into an early grave. Samuel had seen the graves on Briggs's land. 30, another man shouted. Samuel didn't even think, he just acted. A force outside himself seemed to push him forward, to open his mouth. His own voice, rough and loud, echoed through the warehouse. $50. The entire room went silent. You could have heard a pin drop on the dusty floorboards. $50 was an insane amount. It was more than most of these children would earn in 2 years of back-breaking labor. It was the price of a prized bull, not a scrawny girl. The auctioneer's eyes nearly popped out of his head. $50 from the gentleman in the back. Do I hear 60? $50 going once. The silence stretched. No one was stupid enough to bid against Samuel McKinnon. When his mind was made up, it was as final as a rock slide. Sold to Mr. McKinnon for $50. As Samuel strode to the front to pay, his boots echoing on the wood, he locked eyes with the girl. He expected to see fear or maybe relief. He saw neither. What he saw sent a jolt through his entire body. It was pity. This child, this piece of property he had just purchased, was looking at him, the powerful rancher, with pity in her eyes. It made no sense. It was like a lamb pitying the wolf. The auctioneer, grinning, handed him a grimy piece of paper. Name's Rebecca Sullivan. Parents died of fever last winter. Been living rough since. You got yourself a good worker there, Mr. McKinnon. Real good. Samuel folded the paper and stuck it in his coat. He walked over to the girl. Up close, he could see she was even thinner than he thought. Her wrists were like tiny branches. Her shoes were worn through, her toes peeking out. He could have snapped her in two with his bare hands. "Miss Sullivan," he said, his voice softer than he intended. He tipped the brim of his hat. "I'm Samuel McKinnon. You'll be coming to my ranch." She didn't flinch. She just studied his face with those ancient, unnerving eyes. Her own voice, when it came, was soft but clear as a bell. "What kind of work?" "General help. Around the house, the grounds. My wife Martha will explain your duties." She held his gaze. "And if I don't want to come?" The question stunned him. None of the others had dared to speak. They had accepted their fate with the silent terror of the doomed. "You don't have much of a choice in the matter," he said, trying to sound firm. "But winter's coming on fast. The streets of Galveston aren't kind to young folks on their own." Rebecca looked around the warehouse one last time. She saw the remaining children huddled together like frightened sheep. She saw the men with hungry eyes and greedy hands. Then her gaze returned to Samuel, and something inside her seemed to click into place, like a lock finding its key. "I reckon I'll come with you then, Mr. McKinnon," she said. But the way she said it didn't sound like surrender. It sounded like a decision. Her decision. And Samuel had the strangest feeling that he hadn't just bought a servant. He had just made a deal with a power he couldn't possibly understand. The ride to the McKinnon Ranch was long and dusty. It was a full day's journey, cutting through the vast, empty plains of East Texas. Samuel had his supply wagon, and Rebecca sat beside him on the hard wooden bench. She was silent for hours, but she wasn't still. Her eyes were constantly moving, scanning everything. She watched how he handled the horses. She noted the landmarks, a twisted oak, a strange rock formation, a dried-up creek bed. She watched the position of the sun in the sky. She wasn't just a passenger. She was a scout, memorizing the route, burning every detail into her mind. After several hours, the silence started to gnaw at him. "You planning on running off the first chance you get?" he asked, his voice gruff. She didn't even look at him. Her eyes stayed fixed on the horizon. "Depends," she said. Her calm response irritated him. "Depends on what?" "On whether you bought me to work," she said, her voice dropping a little, "or for other reasons." The words hung in the air between them, cold and sharp as a shard of ice. Samuel felt his stomach clench. He pulled the heavy wagon to a sudden halt, the horses stamping and snorting in protest. He turned on the seat to face her fully. The sun was hot on his neck, but a chill ran down his spine. "Miss Sullivan," he said, his voice low and serious, "let's get one thing perfectly clear. You are coming to my ranch to perform honest work. Cooking, cleaning, tending the chickens, that sort of thing. Nothing more. Any man, and I mean any man who would harm a child, deserves to be strung up from the nearest tree. And I include myself in that judgment." She held his gaze for a long, silent moment. Her eyes seemed to be searching for something deep inside him, looking past his weathered skin and into his very soul. He felt exposed, judged by this slip of a girl. Finally, she gave a single, small nod. "All right, then." They rode on. The silence that followed was different. It wasn't tense anymore. It was comfortable. As the sun began to dip low, painting the sky in fiery strokes of orange and purple, they crested a long, rolling hill, and there, laid out in the valley below them, was the McKinnon Ranch. It wasn't just a ranch. It was a kingdom. The main house was a fortress of sturdy timber, 2 stories high with a wide wraparound porch and windows that glittered like diamonds in the setting sun. A massive red barn stood beside it, bigger than the church in town. Smaller outbuildings and cottages were scattered across the property like a small village. And beyond them, Pastures stretched as far as the eye could see, dotted with thousands of cattle, a moving sea of wealth. Rebecca let out a soft breath. It's bigger than I expected. A surge of pride, something he hadn't felt in years, swelled in Samuel's chest. Took me 20 years to build it, he said. He couldn't keep the satisfaction out of his voice. But then the bitterness returned, sharp and familiar. Of course, it'll all belong to strangers when I'm gone. Seeing as Martha and I haven't been blessed with children. He saw something flicker in Rebecca's eyes at his words. A strange, unreadable emotion that was gone as quickly as it appeared. She said nothing. As they pulled the wagon up to the main house, the front door opened and a woman stepped onto the porch. Martha McKinnon. She was still a handsome woman at 38. Her blonde hair had only a few threads of gray, and she had a figure that spoke of a life without hardship. But there was a tightness around her mouth, a permanent sadness in her blue eyes that told a different story. "Samuel," she called, her voice thin but clear. "You're later than I expected." "Had some business in town?" he called back, climbing down stiffly from the wagon. He turned and, almost without thinking, offered a hand to help Rebecca down. "Martha, this is Rebecca Sullivan. She'll be helping around the house." Martha's eyes widened as she took in the girl. The ragged dress, the skinny frame, the dirt on her face. Her expression transformed from tired resignation to shocked concern. "My Lord, child!" she exclaimed, rushing down the steps. "You look like you haven't had a proper meal in months." "Probably hasn't," Samuel said flatly. "I was thinking she could have the small room off the kitchen." "Nonsense," Martha said, her voice suddenly brisk and full of purpose. She put a gentle arm around Rebecca's shoulders. "She'll have the spare bedroom upstairs, the one with the blue curtains. Come along, dear. Let's get you cleaned up and fed before you fade away completely." As Martha led the stunned Rebecca into the house, Samuel stood on the porch, watching them go. He'd expected his wife to be pleased, of course. They needed the help. But this was something else. There was a desperate, hungry energy in the way she'd taken charge of the girl. It was the energy of a woman who had just found a spring in the middle of a desert. Inside, Martha was a whirlwind of activity. She stoked the fire in the kitchen stove, pulled bread and cold beef from the pantry, and started heating a large kettle of water. "Sit down, Rebecca. That is your name, isn't it? Such a pretty name. I had a sister named Rebecca once." Rebecca perched nervously on the edge of a kitchen chair. Her eyes darted around the room, taking in the polished wood table, the cheerful yellow curtains, the copper pots hanging from the ceiling. It was like stepping into a dream. "It's very nice here, Mrs. McKinnon." "Oh, heavens, call me Martha, dear. We're not formal folk out here." Martha placed a heaping plate of food in front of her. "Now, you eat up while I prepare a bath for you. You must be exhausted." Rebecca began to eat, slowly at first, as if her stomach wasn't used to it. Then she ate with a ravenous hunger that was painful to watch. As she ate, Martha chattered on about the ranch, the town, the seasons. But Samuel, standing unseen in the doorway, noticed something odd. His wife's hands were shaking, just slightly, and her voice had a brittle, almost frantic quality to it, a tone he hadn't heard in years. It was the sound of hope, so fragile it might shatter at any moment. He had brought this girl here to be a servant, a solution to a practical problem. But as he watched his wife fuss over the child, a knot of unease tightened in his gut. He had a terrible feeling he hadn't just brought home a helper. He had brought home something far more complicated and far more dangerous. The days that followed fell into a strange new rhythm. Rebecca was a phantom in the house, quiet and efficient. She was everything the auctioneer had promised, and much, much more. She rose before the sun, helping Martha prepare the massive breakfast for the ranch hands. She moved through her chores with a silent grace, cleaning floors, washing linens, her small frame a constant blur of motion. but it was in the garden that she first showed her true colors. The vegetable patch, which had been struggling under Martha's half-hearted care, began to thrive. Rebecca seemed to have an instinct for it, knowing just when to water, how to prune, how to coax life from the stubborn Texas soil. It was a skill that spoke of years of experience, not the fumbling of a child. It was her effect on Martha, however, that was most startling. His wife, who had been slowly sinking into a sea of quiet despair, seemed to reawaken. A light returned to her eyes. She spent hours with Rebecca, teaching her family recipes, showing her how to arrange the wildflowers Rebecca brought in from the fields. In the evenings, she would read to her from the family Bible, her voice soft and steady. "She's a wonderfully bright girl," Martha told Samuel one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the stars begin to prick the velvet sky. "She learns everything so quickly, it's like she's a sponge." "Maybe too quickly," Samuel grumbled, taking a long pull from his cigar. He watched Rebecca in the distance. She was helping one of the older ranch hands, a man named Tom Bradley, doctor a lame horse. She wasn't just holding the lantern, she was pointing, talking, her hands moving with a confidence that was deeply unsettling. She looked less like a helper and more like a surgeon directing an operation. "Sometimes," Samuel said, his voice low, "I get the feeling she's not 14. I get the feeling she's 100 years old." "Oh, Samuel, don't be morbid," Martha chided gently. "She's had to grow up fast, the poor thing, but she's safe now. That's all that matters. She's safe with us." Samuel nodded, but he wasn't convinced. Rebecca worked hard. She caused no trouble. But there were moments when he would catch her staring at the distant horizon, her eyes narrowed with a calculating look he'd seen on cattle buyers and poker players. He noticed how she always seemed to know where everyone was on the ranch at any given time, as if she were keeping a mental map of their movements. She wasn't just living here, she was studying them. One crisp October evening, he found her. Supper was over, the chores were done, and the ranch was settling into the quiet of the night. He saw a flicker of movement in the hayloft of the big barn, and knew, somehow, it was her. He climbed the rough wooden ladder, his boots silent on the rungs. She was sitting in the open hayloft door, her small legs dangling over the edge, silhouetted against a sky awash with the fading colors of sunset. "A penny for your thoughts," he said, his voice startling her. She glanced at him, her expression unreadable in the dim light, then turned her gaze back to the sky. "I was thinking about my parents. The auctioneer said they died of fever." "They did," she confirmed. Her voice was flat, devoid of emotion. "But that's not what I was thinking about. I was thinking about their dreams. Pa, he wanted his own farm, just a small one. He had it all planned out. Ma, she wanted to learn to play the piano. She loved music." Rebecca fell silent for a moment, the only sound the gentle rustle of the wind in the eaves. "I wonder if I'll ever get to have dreams like that." Her words, so simple and sad, struck a chord in him. "What kind of dreams would you have, Rebecca?" She didn't answer right away. She seemed to be considering the question with a seriousness that was far beyond her years. "I think I'd like to learn to read better. Not just the Bible and the almanac. Real books. Books with ideas in them." She paused, then added, her voice barely a whisper, "And I'd like to learn about numbers, not just counting eggs or measuring flour, the kind of arithmetic that helps you figure out important things." Samuel was intrigued. He sat down in the hay a few feet away from her. "What kind of important things?" She finally turned to look at him, her eyes locking onto his in the gathering darkness. "Like how much feed it takes to support 1,000 head of cattle through a dry winter. Like how to tell if the prices you're getting in Kansas City are fair, or if the buyers are cheating you. Like how to look at a set of books and know if you're making money or losing it." She took a breath, and her next words hit him like a physical blow. "Like how to plan for the bad years. so you never have to sell your children." He was stunned into silence. In all his years running this massive operation, he'd never spoken about the intricate finances with anyone. Not his foreman. Not even Martha. It was a burden he carried alone. Yet this 14-year-old girl, this refugee from a cotton field, had somehow cut right to the very heart of it. She understood, with a terrifying clarity, that this knowledge wasn't just about numbers. It was about power. It was about survival. "I could teach you," he heard himself say, the words tumbling out before he could stop them. "If you're truly interested, I could teach you all of it." Her head snapped up. A light ignited in her eyes, a fierce, hungry flame. "You would? You'd really do that?" "Reading, writing, arithmetic," he said, his mind racing. "The basics of running this ranch. But it would be hard work. It would be in addition to your regular chores, not instead of them. After everyone else has gone to bed." "I understand," she said, her voice trembling with an emotion he couldn't quite name. "I'm not afraid of hard work." And so it began. An unlikely alliance formed in the shadows of the barn. Every night, after the house was dark and silent, Rebecca would slip into Samuel's study. The room smelled of leather and old paper, a place she had never been allowed to enter before. There, by the flickering light of a single oil lamp, he laid the secrets of his kingdom at her feet. He taught her to read from his own books, Shakespeare, Plutarch, histories of Rome. He taught her sums and figures, showing her the ledgers he kept hidden in a locked drawer of his desk. And he was astonished. She didn't just learn, she devoured the knowledge. She absorbed complex ideas about crop rotation, cattle breeding, and market futures with a speed that was both thrilling and deeply frightening. Martha was overjoyed by the arrangement. "It's just wonderful to see her learning so much, Samuel," she'd say. "Every young woman should have a proper education." But as the days grew shorter and the Texas winter began to set in, Samuel started noticing other changes in his wife. Martha's attention to Rebecca had always been intense, but now it bordered on obsession. She ordered expensive new dresses for the girl from a catalog, spent hours brushing and braiding Rebecca's long brown hair, and insisted on drilling her in what she called proper manners for a young lady. Rebecca accepted all this fussing with a quiet, patient grace. But sometimes, when she thought no one was looking, Samuel would see her catch her own reflection in a mirror, and the expression on her face was not one of gratitude. It was the look of a soldier putting on a disguise, playing a part in a very dangerous game. He was teaching her how to run his ranch. Martha was teaching her how to be a lady. But Samuel had the chilling suspicion that Rebecca already knew something far more important. She knew how to survive. And he was starting to wonder just what she had survived before she came to them. The truth, he suspected, was a lot darker than a simple story of orphaned poverty. And he was afraid that whatever darkness she was running from, it was following her, and it was getting closer every day. The first real test came in late November. A freak storm, a true Texas norther, blew in from the plains, bringing 3 straight days of freezing rain and howling wind. It was a brutal, killing cold that turned the world to a sheet of ice. The ranch hands worked around the clock, their faces raw from the wind, struggling to herd the terrified cattle into sheltered gullies and secure the barn doors against the gale. Inside the main house, Martha and Rebecca were a fortress of their own, keeping a constant supply of hot coffee and stew flowing to the half-frozen men. The kitchen was an oasis of warmth and light in the middle of the storm's fury. On the second night, with the wind shrieking like a banshee outside, it happened. One of the newer ranch hands, a young cocksure drifter named Jake Winters, saw his chance. Samuel was out in the barn with the foreman, trying to save a newborn calf. Martha had gone upstairs to fetch more blankets. Rebecca was alone in the kitchen, her back to the door, stirring a massive pot of stew. Jake slipped in, the cold wind following him. Getting real pretty, ain't ya? He said, his voice a low drawl. He moved closer, his smell of wet wool and cheap whiskey filling the warm air. Bet you get lonely sometimes, stuck out here with just a couple of old folks for company. Rebecca didn't turn around. I'm busy, Jake. He ignored her. He was close enough now that she could feel his breath on her neck. Come on now, don't be shy, he purred, his hand reaching for her shoulder. A sweet little thing like you shouldn't be so cold. I could show you some fun. I think you should go back to the bunkhouse, Rebecca said. Her voice was quiet, but it was as sharp and cold as the wind outside. Not until I get what I came for, Jake sneered, and his hand grabbed her arm. He never saw it coming. In a single fluid motion, Rebecca spun around. The heavy cast iron skillet she'd been using to fry bacon that morning was in her hand. She swung it in a short, brutal arc. There was a sickening thud as metal met bone. Jake's eyes went wide with shock, a grunt of pain escaping his lips. He crumpled to the kitchen floor like a puppet with its strings cut. He wasn't unconscious, but he was dazed, stars exploding behind his eyes. Rebecca stood over him, the skillet held ready. Her face was a mask of cold fury. I said, she repeated, her voice dangerously low. Go back to the bunkhouse. Jake struggled to his knees, clutching his head. Blood was already trickling from a cut on his temple, matting his greasy hair. You little hellcat, he stammered, his bravado gone. You could have killed me. Could have, Rebecca said, her eyes like chips of ice. Didn't. I won't be so careful next time. What in God's name is going on in here? Samuel's voice cut through the tense standoff like a whip crack. He stood in the kitchen doorway, his face grim, the melting ice on his coat dripping onto the floor. He took in the scene in a single glance. Jake on the floor, bleeding. Rebecca standing over him with the skillet, her knuckles white, her expression one of absolute, lethal calm. Jake scrambled to his feet, trying to salvage some dignity. Mr. McKinnon, this girl, she just attacked me. For no reason. I know exactly what you were doing, Winters, Samuel said, his voice a low growl of thunder. His eyes were colder than the storm outside. Pack your gear. I want you off this ranch. Tonight. Jake's jaw dropped. But Mr. McKinnon, it's a blizzard out there. I'll freeze to death. Should have thought of that before you decided to bother a child under my roof. Under my protection. Samuel's hand moved, resting lightly on the butt of the Colt revolver at his hip. The gesture was casual, but it was a death sentence. You have 10 minutes to be gone. If you're still on my land after that, I'll drag you out myself. And I won't be gentle about it. Jake looked from Samuel's merciless face to Rebecca's. He saw no pity, no mercy in either of them. He saw two predators looking at a piece of meat. He stumbled backwards, clutching his head, and fled into the storm. This ain't over, he yelled back from the porch. Yes, Samuel said quietly to the empty doorway. It is. After Jake had vanished into the screaming wind, Samuel turned to Rebecca. He felt a strange mix of pride and terror. Are you all right? She finally lowered the skillet, her hands trembling slightly now that the danger had passed. She nodded. I'm sorry about the trouble. You have nothing to apologize for, he said gruffly. You defended yourself, and you showed a hell of a lot more restraint than I would have. He looked at her, really looked at her. The fury was gone from her face, replaced by a weary sadness. Where did a girl like you learn to handle herself like that? Living on the streets teaches you things, she said simply, offering no further explanation. Just then, Martha appeared in the doorway, her face pale. She had heard the shouting. When Samuel quickly explained what had happened, her face contorted with a rage that startled him. That animal, she hissed. She rushed to Rebecca, fussing over her, checking for injuries. Thank God you're safe, my dear. Thank God. But as Martha held Rebecca, Samuel saw that his wife's hands were shaking uncontrollably. Her eyes kept darting to the windows, to the darkness outside, as if she expected a whole army of monsters to come crawling out of the storm. That night, long after the storm had blown itself out and the ranch was buried in a deep, silent blanket of ice and snow, Samuel sat in his study, trying to make sense of the ranch accounts. But the numbers blurred before his eyes. All he could see was Rebecca's face, cold and determined, as she stood over the fallen man. The door opened, and Martha came in. Her face was set in grim lines. "We need to talk, Samuel." He looked up from his ledgers. "About what happened tonight." "About Rebecca." She sank heavily into the leather chair opposite his desk. It was the chair reserved for important business. "Samuel, we can't keep pretending. We can't go on like this." "What do you mean, Martha?" "I mean, look at her. Really look at her," Martha said, her voice tight. "She's not just a hired girl, not anymore. She's turning into a beautiful young woman. And we're two childless people who have grown far, far too attached." Her voice broke on the last words. "What happens when she decides to leave? What happens when some young man from town comes courting her? We'll be left with nothing again, just this big, empty house." Samuel put down his pen. He had been pushing these same thoughts away for weeks. "She's only been here a few months, Martha. And in those few months, she has become the daughter we never had." Martha leaned forward, her eyes pleading. "Don't you dare tell me you don't feel it too." He couldn't deny it. He looked away, toward the fireplace. "So what are you suggesting?" Her answer came swift and certain, as if she had been rehearsing it for weeks. "I'm suggesting we make it official. We should adopt her, Samuel. Legally." The word hung in the air, heavy and momentous. "Martha, she's not some stray puppy. She's not an orphan. She was sold. She might have family somewhere." "Who?" Martha shot back. "The county sold her. Her parents are dead. She has no one. And she's happy here. I know she is." She reached across the desk, her hand closing over his. Her skin was cold. "Samuel, please. This is our chance. The chance we prayed for all those years. A family. A real family. An heir for the ranch." He understood her desperation. It was a mirror of his own loneliness. But something about it felt wrong. It felt rushed. It felt like they were trying to put a cage around a wild bird. "We have to ask her first," he said finally. "It has to be her choice." Of course," Martha said quickly. "But think about it, Samuel. She'd have a real home, a name. She would inherit everything, this entire ranch. Isn't that better than whatever life she had before? Isn't that better than any uncertain future she might face on her own?" Later that night, Samuel lay awake in his bed, staring into the darkness. Martha's words echoed in his head. An heir for the ranch. The idea was a powerful temptation. Rebecca was smart, capable, and understood the workings of the ranch better than any man he'd ever hired. She would be the perfect successor. But was that what Rebecca wanted? Or were they just two lonely, desperate people trying to trap her into fixing their own broken lives? He thought again of the look in her eyes at the auction, the look of pity, and a cold dread washed over him. He was beginning to understand. She wasn't pitying him for his wealth or his power. She was pitying him for his blindness. He thought he was in control of the situation. He thought he was the one making the plans, pulling the strings. He was wrong. The answer he was looking for came 2 days later, not from Martha, but from Rebecca herself. The icy weather had broken, and a weak winter sun was shining on the snow-covered ranch. They were in his study, ostensibly for her nightly lesson, but Rebecca wasn't looking at the ledger book in front of her. She was looking at him. "Mr. McKinnon," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course," he said, setting down his pen. "Mrs. McKinnon. She wants to adopt me, doesn't she?" The question was so direct, so blunt, it felt like a punch to the gut. His pen froze over the page. What makes you say a thing like that? Little things, she said, closing the heavy ledger. The way she talks about the future, the expensive clothes she keeps buying me, the way she introduces me to people when we go into town. She doesn't say, "This is our hired help." She says, "This is our Rebecca." Rebecca looked down at her hands, then back up at him. Her eyes were clear and steady. She's a kind woman, and I am grateful, more grateful than I can say, for everything you have both done for me. She took a deep breath. But before this goes any further, I need you to know something. What's that? He asked, his heart starting to pound in his chest. Rebecca chose her next words very carefully, like a person walking through a minefield. When you bought me in Galveston, I wasn't entirely truthful about my circumstances. Samuel put his pen down slowly on the desk. A cold knot formed in his stomach. Go on. My parents did die of fever. That part was true, she began. But I wasn't just living rough on the streets after they were gone. She met his gaze, and the look in her eyes was one of grim, world-weary experience. I was working for a man named Garrett Mills. Samuel's blood ran cold. He knew the name. Everyone in East Texas knew the name. Garrett Mills was a phantom, a whisper in the dark corners of Galveston. He was a man who controlled the docks, the gambling dens, the smuggling routes, a man who dealt in secrets and violence. What kind of work? Samuel asked, his voice barely a whisper. He almost didn't want to know the answer. Not what you're thinking, Rebecca said quickly, seeing the look on his face. I was too young for his other businesses, but I was smart. I was good with numbers, and I could move around the city without anyone noticing me. I kept his books, Mr. McKinnon, the real ones. I carried his messages. I watched for trouble from the law. The room was silent. The ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall sounded like a hammer beating against an anvil. Why are you telling me this now? Samuel finally managed to ask. Because Martha deserves to know what kind of person she's thinking of bringing into her family. Rebecca hesitated, then her gaze flickered towards the window, towards the distant, snow-covered hills. And because I think someone has been watching the ranch. Samuel's hand instinctively moved towards the drawer where he kept his pistol. What do you mean, watching? Yesterday, when I was fetching water from the well, I saw something flash on the eastern ridge, sunlight reflecting off metal, like a spyglass. Her voice was low and urgent. And a few days ago, before the storm, I found fresh horse tracks down by the creek. The shoe prints don't match any of the horses on this ranch. I checked. He felt a surge of adrenaline. You think Mills sent someone after you? Maybe. Or maybe it's someone else. Her eyes were dark with a knowledge he couldn't comprehend. I learned a long time ago from Mr. Mills to pay attention when things don't feel right. And things here, they don't feel right. Samuel stood up and walked to the window, his mind racing. He scanned the hills Rebecca had indicated, but saw nothing but snow and trees. Why didn't you tell me this sooner? Rebecca looked down at the ledger on the desk, a book full of his own secrets. Because I hoped I was wrong, she said softly. And because I was afraid you'd send me away if you knew the truth about my past. He turned back to face her. The frail girl he'd bought at an auction was gone. In her place stood a young woman forged in a world of danger and deceit, and he felt a sudden, fierce wave of protectiveness. Rebecca, he said, his voice rough with emotion. What you did to survive doesn't define who you are. What matters is who you are now. He paused, his expression hardening. But this man, Mills, is he the kind of man to hold a grudge? Is he likely to come after you? She looked up at him, and for the first time, he saw a flicker of genuine fear in her eyes. I don't know, she whispered. I never stole from him. I never betrayed him. I just left. She hesitated, But Mr. Mills doesn't like loose ends, and I know all of his secrets. That very evening, Samuel called his foreman, Tom Bradley, into his study. Tom was a tough, grizzled Texan who had been with the ranch for over a decade. He was one of the few men Samuel trusted with his life. "Tom, I need you to quietly set up a watch rotation," Samuel said, skipping any pleasantries. 24 hours a day. I want eyes on every road, every trail leading to this ranch. Someone's been scouting the property. Tom's weathered face grew serious. He didn't ask questions. "You think we're going to have trouble, boss?" "I think we need to be prepared for it," Samuel replied. "Tell the men I'll pay them a bonus. And tell them to shoot first and ask questions later if anyone tries to cross our fences after dark." As Tom left to organize the men, Samuel found Martha in the kitchen. He told her everything. He told her about Garrett Mills, about Rebecca's past, about the watchers in the hills. He watched his wife's face carefully, expecting to see fear or disgust. Martha listened in complete silence, her hands never stopping their task of kneading bread dough. When he finished, she dusted the flour from her hands, turned, and faced him. Her expression was not one of fear. It was one of pure, unadulterated fury. "Does this change how you feel about her?" she asked, her voice dangerously calm. "No," Samuel said honestly. "If anything, it makes me respect her more. She survived things that would have broken most grown men." "Then it doesn't change how I feel either," Martha said, her voice as hard as steel. "That child has been through enough hell. If trouble is coming for her, it will have to come through me first." Samuel felt a surge of love and admiration for his wife. For all her gentle ways, Martha had a core of iron. "There's something else," he said. "I think we need to hold off on the adoption idea. For now. Rebecca needs to feel like she has a choice, not like she's being passed from one owner to another." Martha's face fell for a moment, the disappointment clear, but she nodded, understanding. "You're right. Her safety comes first." Then she looked at him, her eyes shining with a fierce light. "But you need to know, Samuel. That girl, she has brought something back to life in me that I thought was dead and buried forever. I won't lose her. I know," he said softly. "She's done the same for me." He realized in that moment that the lines had been drawn. The McKinnon Ranch was no longer just a cattle operation. It was a fortress, and they were guarding something far more precious than livestock. The attack came 3 nights later. It came in the dead of night, under the cold, merciless light of a full moon. It was Rebecca who heard them first. She had taken to sleeping with the lightness of a cat, every nerve on edge. A faint, distant drumming sound pulled her from a restless sleep. Horses, a lot of them, and they were moving fast. She slipped from her bed and crept to her window. Peering out into the moon-drenched landscape, she saw them. A group of dark figures on horseback, riding hard toward the ranch house from the south. She counted them. 6. No, 7 riders. She didn't scream, she didn't panic. She ran. Her bare feet made no sound on the wooden floors as she raced to Samuel and Martha's bedroom door and pounded on it with her fists. "Mr. McKinnon! Riders coming! Coming fast!" Samuel was awake instantly, years of sleeping on the trail having trained him to go from sleep to full alert in a heartbeat. He swung out of bed, grabbing the heavy Winchester rifle he always kept beside it. "How many?" "I saw at least 7. Martha was already out of bed, pulling on her robe, her face pale but resolute. "Is it him? Is it Mills?" "Don't know," Samuel said, pulling on his boots. "But we're not going to wait to find out." He turned to Martha. "Get to the bunkhouse. Wake Tom and the men. Tell them it's not a drill." He then looked at Rebecca, who was standing in the doorway, her small frame radiating an eerie calm. "Rebecca, there's a loaded shotgun in the kitchen pantry, double barrel. You know how to use one?" "Yes, sir," she said without hesitation. "Good," he said, nodding grimly. "Take up a position at the back door. Don't let anyone through. Shoot anything that tries." As Rebecca darted towards the kitchen, she risked a glance out one of the parlor windows. The riders were closer now, spreading out, preparing to surround the house. In the bright moonlight, she could see the face of the man in the lead. A cold, sickening dread washed over her. It was Jake Winters, the ranch hand Samuel had fired, and riding behind him were several other men, their faces hard and cruel. She recognized two of them. They were enforcers from Galveston. They were Garrett Mills's men. The attack started with a bellow from Jake, his voice full of drunken rage. "McKinnon! Send out the girl! Send her out and nobody else gets hurt!" Samuel's reply boomed from an upstairs window, his voice like the wrath of God. "You're trespassing on my land, Winters. You and your scum have 1 minute to clear out before I start shooting." "This ain't about you, old man," Jake screamed back. "It's about the girl. She stole something that belongs to my employer. He wants it back." Rebecca felt her blood turn to ice. He knew, they knew, about the ledger. Before she had fled Galveston, in a moment of desperate foresight, she had taken it. It was a small, leather-bound book that contained all of Mills's secrets, the names of bribed officials, the shipping manifests for his smuggled goods, the secret accounts. She had thought of it as her insurance policy, a weapon to keep her safe. Now, it was a death warrant. The night exploded. The first shots came from the east, where two of Mills's men were trying to force their way into the barn. Gunfire erupted from the hayloft as Tom Bradley and another ranch hand returned fire. The attackers scrambled back into the darkness, dragging one of their wounded. Then, glass shattered in the front parlor. Someone was coming through a window. Rebecca abandoned her post at the back door, her heart pounding. She crept through the darkened house, the heavy shotgun feeling reassuringly solid in her hands. She reached the parlor just in time to see one of Mills's thugs halfway through the broken window, his leg caught on the frame. She didn't hesitate. She didn't think. She raised the shotgun, aimed, and pulled the trigger. The roar was deafening in the confined space. The man was blasted backwards out of the window with a high-pitched scream, a spray of dark blood staining the snow outside. "Rebecca!" Martha's voice called down from the top of the stairs. "Are you all right, child?" "Fine!" Rebecca yelled back, her hands already working, breaking open the shotgun, ejecting the spent shell, and slotting a fresh one into the chamber. The smell of gunpowder was thick in the air. The firefight raged on. It felt like an eternity, but it was probably less than 20 minutes. Samuel and his men were better shots and had the advantage of cover, but Mills's men were numerous and fought with a desperate ferocity. Bullets splintered the wood of the house, chewing up the porch railings. Finally, a voice cut through the chaos of the gunfire. It was Jake. "McKinnon, I'm coming in. Under a white flag. Let's talk." Samuel, positioned at his bedroom window, considered it for a moment. He saw Jake step out from behind a water trough, holding up a dirty handkerchief. "Come ahead!" Samuel yelled back. "But keep your hands where I can see them!" Jake swaggered towards the front porch, trying to look confident, but Rebecca noticed he kept his body angled, staying behind the thick porch columns as much as possible. "McKinnon, this is real simple," Jake said, his voice strained. "Just send out the girl. That's all we want. You give us the girl, and we ride away. No one else has to die tonight." "And what makes you think," Samuel's voice dripped with contempt, "that I would ever turn over a child to scum like you?" "Because if you don't," Jake sneered, "we'll burn this whole damn place to the ground with you and your woman in it. We've got enough men. We've got enough firepower. We can wait until morning." Samuel was about to reply with a bullet when the front door creaked open. Rebecca stepped out onto the porch. She stood there in her simple nightgown, the big shotgun held loosely in her arms. Her long brown hair was undone, flowing over her shoulders. In the moonlight, she looked like an avenging angel. Jake's face twisted into a mask of rage and lust. "There you are, pretty girl. You've caused me a whole heap of trouble." "You caused your own trouble, Jake," Rebecca said. Her voice was steady, without a trace of fear. It carried across the frozen yard, clear and cold. What does Mr. Mills really want? You know what he wants, Jake spat. That little book, the one you took when you ran off. Give it to us. Samuel stared at Rebecca, his mind reeling. A book. This was all over a book, but Rebecca's eyes never left Jake's face. And if I give it to him? She asked. Then you're free to go, Jake said with a shrug. Mills doesn't want you. He's got plenty of girls. He just wants his property back. That ledger is his property. Rebecca was silent for a long, tense moment. The ledger was hidden upstairs, sewn into the lining of the same ragged dress she had worn on the day Samuel bought her. It was her only leverage, her only defense. But she looked around at the bullet-pocked house. She thought of Samuel and Martha, and she knew what she had to do. All right, she said finally. Her voice was firm. But I want something in return. Jake let out a harsh laugh. You ain't in no position to be making bargains, girl. Aren't I? Rebecca's voice turned to ice. She gestured with the barrel of her shotgun towards the darkness around them. Your men are scattered. You've already lost at least 2. Mr. McKinnon's men are the best shots in this county, and they know this land. You might eventually take this house, but it will cost you. It will cost you, all of you. Are you willing to die for that book? Samuel stepped out onto the porch to stand beside her, his own rifle held at the ready. The girl's right, Winters. You want to start a war you can't win? Jake's confidence began to crumble. He looked past them, into the dark shapes of the bunkhouse and the barn, and he knew they were right. He was outgunned and outmaneuvered. What do you want? He grumbled. A guarantee, Rebecca said, her plan forming in her mind with cold, crystalline clarity. I give you the book. You and your men ride away from this ranch and you never ever come back. And you tell Garrett Mills that I'm dead. Jake stared at her, confused. Dead? That's right, Rebecca said, a grim smile touching her lips. You tell him I was killed in the firefight. That way, he has his book, he has his revenge, and he has no reason to ever send anyone else looking for me. He gets his loose end tied up. Jake was suspicious. And what makes you think he'll believe a story like that? Rebecca's smile widened. It was a chilling, predatory sight. Because you're going to bring him proof. You're going to bring him a piece of my dress, with my blood on it. The silence that followed was absolute. Samuel looked at this 14-year-old girl standing beside him, negotiating for her own death with the cold calculation of a master strategist, and he felt a profound sense of awe. She wasn't just surviving, she was fighting back. She was rewriting the rules of the game. The deal was struck in the cold moonlight. Rebecca went upstairs, her face a pale, determined mask. She returned a few minutes later with the small, leather-bound ledger. She also carried a strip of cloth torn from the ragged dress she had first arrived in. Without a word, she took a small knife from her pocket and made a quick, shallow cut on her palm. She squeezed her hand, letting the dark blood drip onto the fabric until it was thoroughly stained. She handed the book and the bloody cloth to Samuel, who walked to the edge of the porch and threw them down into the snow at Jake's feet. You have what you came for, Samuel snarled. Now get off my land. Jake snatched up the items. He looked back at Rebecca one last time, his face a strange mixture of anger, fear, and something that looked almost like regret. You could have had an easy life in the city, girl, he muttered. Why'd you choose this? This place in the middle of nowhere? Rebecca looked past him at the sprawling ranch house, now scarred with bullet holes. She looked at Samuel, standing beside her like a mountain. She looked up at the window where she knew Martha was watching, her heart in her throat. She thought of the warmth of the kitchen, the smell of the library, the feeling of safety she had only just begun to know. Because this, she said, her voice clear and strong, is home. In the weeks that followed the attack, a fragile peace settled over the McKinnon ranch, but it was a peace bought with gunpowder and blood, and no one could forget it. The bullet holes in the walls were a constant reminder. Samuel hired 2 more full-time guards and had Tom Bradley, a former Army scout, begin teaching everyone, including Martha and Rebecca, how to shoot with deadly accuracy. The ranch had become a garrison. But the crisis had forged them into something new. The pretense was gone. Rebecca was no longer a servant, and they were no longer her employers. They were survivors. They were a unit. One cold December evening, they sat around the roaring fire in the main parlor. The mood was quiet, reflective. It was Martha who finally broke the silence, voicing the thought that was on all their minds. "Rebecca, my dear," she said softly, her knitting needles still in her lap. "We need to talk about your future." Rebecca looked up from the book she was reading, one of Samuel's advanced treatises on cattle breeding. Her face was calm. "What about it?" "Well," Martha said, exchanging a quick glance with Samuel, "you're not a child anymore, and you are most certainly not our servant. You are our family." She took a deep breath. "Samuel and I were wondering how you would feel about making that official, about becoming a true member of this family." "You mean adoption?" Rebecca stated. It wasn't a question. "If that is what you want," Samuel said, leaning forward in his chair. His voice was serious. "But we want you to understand what it would mean. It's not just about a name. You would inherit this ranch one day, all of it. You'd have a say in every decision we make. But with that comes responsibility. A duty to this land, to the people who work it, to the community we've built." Rebecca closed her book and placed it carefully on the table beside her. She looked from Samuel's earnest face to Martha's hopeful one. For a long time, she said nothing. The only sound was the crackle and pop of the fire. "Can I ask you something first?" she said finally. "Anything," Martha breathed. "Why did you really buy me that day in Galveston?" Samuel and Martha looked at each other. Samuel answered first, his voice rough with honesty. "Honestly, girl, I don't fully know. I saw something in your eyes, a fire, a fight. It reminded me of myself when I was a young man, trying to carve a place for myself in this world with nothing but grit. I respected it." He paused. "And I saw a child who deserved a hell of a lot better than what life had handed her. I wanted to help," Martha added, her eyes glistening with tears. "I saw a lost little girl, and my heart broke. I just wanted to give you a safe place to land." Rebecca nodded slowly, absorbing their words. A small, genuine smile touched her lips. "Then yes," she said, her voice clear and strong. "I would be honored to be your daughter." Martha let out a sob of pure joy and rushed to embrace her. Samuel felt a warmth spread through his chest that had nothing to do with the fire. It was a feeling he thought he'd lost forever. But Rebecca wasn't finished. She gently separated herself from Martha's embrace. "But," she said, her expression turning serious again, "I want to earn my place here. I don't want it to be a gift." Samuel raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" "I want you to teach me everything," she said, her gaze intense. "Not just the books. I want to ride the fence lines with you. I want to learn the cattle auctions. I want to understand the water rights and the land leases. I want to prove that I can make this ranch stronger and more profitable than it has ever been." She took another breath, her eyes shining with a new purpose. "And there's something else. I want to help other children. Children like I was. There are so many of them out there, lost and forgotten. Maybe we could do something about that." Samuel and Martha stared at her, stunned. What did you have in mind?" Samuel asked, intrigued. "What if we started small?" Rebecca said, her mind clearly already working, laying out a plan. "We have the room, we have the resources. What if we took in 1 or 2 other children a year? Children who have no one, who are trapped in bad situations. We could give them a home, teach them a trade, blacksmithing, carpentry, ranching. We could give them an education. We could give them a chance to build a real life. That's a wonderful idea, Martha said immediately, her face alight with a passion Samuel hadn't seen in 20 years. A house full of children. Samuel was more cautious, his mind already turning over the practicalities. It would be expensive, Rebecca, and dangerous. We'd have to be careful about who we bring in. We can't just open our doors to everyone. I could help with that, Rebecca said, her voice firm with a chilling authority. I know that world. I know how to spot the survivors, the ones who are worth saving, and I know how to recognize the predators, the ones who would only cause trouble. They talked late into the night, the three of them. The initial idea of a simple adoption had blossomed into something far grander, far more audacious. They weren't just planning to create a family anymore. They were planning to build an army of rescued children forged in hardship, trained and educated on the McKinnon Ranch. It was a bold, insane, and beautiful idea. And as Samuel finally went to bed, he knew, with absolute certainty, that the $50 he had spent in that filthy Galveston warehouse was the single greatest investment he had ever made. The girl he had bought to save his ranch was about to do something much more. She was about to change the world. 5 years later, the McKinnon Ranch was a different place. The spring of 1892 was wet and green, and the pastures were thick with grass and cattle. But the biggest change wasn't the number of livestock. It was the number of children. Rebecca McKinnon stood on the wide front porch, watching a wagon rumble up the long drive from town. At 19, she was no longer a girl. She was a woman. The hollows in her cheeks had filled out, and she moved with a confidence that was magnetic. She was dressed not in fine silks, but in practical denim trousers and a simple cotton shirt, her long hair tied back in a practical braid. She looked like what she was, the undisputed heir and operational manager of the most powerful ranch in the county. The wagon was driven by Tom Bradley, the foreman. Beside him sat a scrawny boy of about 12, his eyes suspicious and angry, his clothes little more than rags. In the back of the wagon, huddled together, were two other children, a silent, wide-eyed girl of 8, and a little boy who couldn't have been more than 10. More strays from the city? A voice grumbled from behind her. Rebecca smiled without turning. The Children's Aid Society sent word they were coming, Pa. Samuel McKinnon stepped out onto the porch to stand beside her. The years had been kind to him. The lines of bitterness on his face had softened. Having a purpose beyond profit had agreed with him. The boy's name is Marcus, Rebecca continued, her eyes on the approaching children. Parents died in a factory fire in Houston. The girl is Anna. Her mother left her at a church. The little one is Billy. He was living on the streets, stealing to eat. Samuel nodded. Over the past 5 years, the ranch had become a legend. They had taken in 15 children, 15 souls pulled from the wreckage of life. Some, after learning a trade, had moved on to start their own lives in town. Others had stayed, becoming permanent members of the sprawling, unconventional McKinnon family. The ranch had prospered beyond Samuel's wildest dreams. Rebecca's sharp mind and her uncanny ability to predict market trends had increased their profits by nearly 30%. She had single-handedly negotiated new contracts with beef buyers in Kansas City and Chicago, cutting out the greedy middlemen. The front door opened and Martha came out, wiping her hands on her apron. At 43, she looked younger and happier than she had at 30. The constant presence of children, the noise, the chaos, the need to nurture. It had been the cure for a sickness she didn't even know she had. "Are they hungry?" she asked. It was always her first question. "Most likely," Rebecca replied. "Tom said they've been on the road for 3 days." As the wagon pulled to a stop, Rebecca walked down the steps to greet them. The boy, Marcus, watched her approach with a defiant scowl. His eyes were like 2 chips of flint. "You're Rebecca McKinnon?" he demanded, his voice raspy. "I am," she said, her voice calm and gentle. "And you must be Marcus Thompson." "Maybe," he shot back. "Depends on what you want from me." Rebecca smiled. It was a knowing smile, one that said, "I was you, once." "Right now," she said, "I want you to come inside and get a hot meal. After that, we'll talk about what happens next." "And if I don't want to stay?" he challenged. "Then you don't stay," Rebecca said simply. "No one here is a prisoner. But before you make up your mind, let me show you something." She didn't lead him to the big house. She led him towards the massive barn. Inside, the air was warm and smelled of hay and horses. Several of the older children who now called the ranch home were working. One of them, a powerfully built young man of 18 named David, was shoeing a horse. He looked up as they entered, his face breaking into a friendly grin. "New arrivals, Beck?" he asked. "Marcus, Anna, and Billy," Rebecca replied. "David, why don't you tell Marcus what your first week here was like?" David laughed, a deep, hearty sound. He straightened up from the horse's hoof. "My first week?" he said, looking at Marcus. "I spent most of it trying to figure out a way to steal a horse and run away. Figured this place was just another kind of trap, a fancy one." Marcus's suspicious eyes narrowed. "What changed your mind?" "They kept their word," David said simply. "Rebecca and Mr. McKinnon, they told me I was free to leave any time I wanted. And they meant it. They told me they'd teach me a useful skill, and they did." He gestured with his hammer towards the forge in the corner. "Taught me how to be a blacksmith. They said they'd treat me fair, and they have." David turned back to his work, lifting the horse's hoof. "I've been here 4 years now. Next month, with a loan from Mr. McKinnon, I'm opening my own blacksmith shop in town." Marcus was silent. He looked around the bustling, well-organized barn. He saw the healthy, well-cared-for animals. He saw the other children working, not with the fear of slaves, but with the confidence of apprentices. "And they don't," he started, his voice low. "They don't make you do anything improper?" David stopped his work and looked Marcus straight in the eye. His expression was fierce. "Never," he said firmly. "Mr. and Mrs. McKinnon are good people. So is Rebecca. They saved my life. Don't you ever forget that." That evening, after the new children had been fed and settled into the clean, comfortable bunkhouse reserved for new arrivals, Rebecca sat in Samuel's study. The ledgers were open on the desk, but for once, they weren't looking at them. Samuel looked at his daughter, his heart swelling with a pride that was almost painful. "You realize what you've built here, don't you?" he said, his voice thick with emotion. "We built a successful cattle ranch," she replied with a small smile. "No," he said, shaking his head. "It's more than that. We've created something that will outlast us. It's a legacy. These children, the ones we've helped, they'll go on to help others. The skills, the values, the kindness we've shown them, that will ripple outwards for generations." Rebecca set down her pen. "Do you ever regret it, Pa? That day in Galveston, spending so much money on a worthless, ragged girl?" Samuel considered the question seriously. "Not for a single second," he said. "Best $50 I ever spent." He leaned forward. "But I have to ask you the same thing. Do you ever regret coming with me, leaving that other life behind?" "Never," Rebecca said, her voice firm. "You and Ma gave me something I thought I had lost forever. A family. And now you're giving that same chance to others," he said softly. Rebecca nodded, then looked out the window towards the bunkhouse, where a light still burned. "Pa," she said, her voice thoughtful. "There's something I've been thinking about." "What's that?" "I'm 19 now," she began. "Most girls my age are thinking about marriage, about starting families of their own. And I keep thinking about all the children still out there, all the ones who need help, all the work we still have to do right here." She paused, turning to face him. "What if this is my calling? What if, instead of having children of my own, I'm meant to be a mother to the ones who have no one else. Samuel studied her face, the face of the determined girl he'd met in the warehouse, now matured into the face of a dedicated, compassionate woman. That's a big decision, Rebecca. Are you sure you're not just afraid? Afraid of leaving this safe place we've built? Maybe a little, she admitted with a wry smile. But mostly, I just feel like this is where I belong. This ranch, this work, this crazy patchwork family we've built. Her smile faded, replaced by a look of profound certainty. It feels right, Pa. In my bones. Then that's good enough for me, Samuel said, his voice husky. But you remember you're still young. You're allowed to change your mind someday. I know, she said. And if I do, I know you and Ma will support me. No matter what. Always, he promised. But their peaceful kingdom was not to last. A shadow was falling over Texas, a new enemy that couldn't be fought with guns or walls. It was a threat that came from the sky itself. And lurking in the darkness, the ghosts of Rebecca's past were not as dead as she believed. They were waiting, and they were patient. The real test, the one that would threaten to destroy everything they had built, came the following year. The summer of 1893 arrived like a hammer blow. The rain stopped. The sun, a merciless white disk in a bleached-out sky, baked the land day after day. Creeks and rivers dried up, turning into cracked, muddy scars on the landscape. The lush green pastures turned to a brittle, dusty brown. Drought. It was the great killer of the West, more feared than bandits or disease. Cattle across the state began to die. Ranches that had stood for generations started to fail, their owners forced to sell off their herds for pennies on the dollar or watch them starve. The McKinnon Ranch, for all its wealth and planning, was not immune. One evening, Samuel called a meeting. Everyone on the ranch, the hired hands, the permanent family members, the newest arrivals, gathered in the cavernous main barn. The air was thick with heat and the smell of dust and fear. Samuel stood on a hay bale, his face grim in the lantern light. I won't lie to you, he began, his voice echoing in the quiet barn. This is the worst drought I have seen in 20 years. We're losing cattle every day. The north pasture well has gone dry. We're going to have to make some very hard choices. A hand went up in the crowd. It was Marcus, the suspicious boy who had arrived a year ago. Now, at 13, he was one of the hardest working and most dedicated residents of the ranch, his anger replaced by a fierce loyalty. What kind of choices, Mr. McKinnon? It was Rebecca who answered. She stood beside Samuel, her face calm and steady, a beacon of strength in the worried crowd. We may have to sell off a large part of the herd before they lose too much weight to be worth anything. And we'll need to find new sources of water, which means digging new wells, deep ones. A young girl named Sarah, a 15-year-old who had arrived 6 months earlier after escaping a brutal sweatshop, asked the question that was on every child's mind. Her voice trembled. What about us? Will you have to send us away? Martha, who had been standing silently at the edge of the crowd, stepped forward. Her voice rang out, firm and absolute, leaving no room for doubt. Absolutely not, she declared. We are a family, and this family sticks together, no matter what. No one is leaving. A murmur of relief went through the children. Then David, the young blacksmith, stepped forward. His face was resolute. Mr. McKinnon, Rebecca, Mrs. McKinnon, you've all done so much for us. You gave us a home when we had nothing. Now it's our turn to help you. He turned to the crowd. We can work longer hours. We can take on extra chores. We can ration our food and water. Whatever it takes, we will do it. A chorus of agreement rose from the group. Even the youngest children, like little Anna and Billy, nodded their heads with solemn determination. In that moment, Samuel realized the true nature of what they had built. This wasn't just a refuge. It was an army, forged in hardship, bound by loyalty, and they were about to go to war against the sky itself. The months that followed were a brutal, grinding struggle for survival. The ranch family pulled together with a ferocity that amazed even Samuel. The older children took on the work of grown men, riding out at dawn and returning after dusk, their faces caked with dust, their bodies aching with exhaustion. Marcus, the boy from the streets, revealed an uncanny, almost magical talent for finding water. He would walk the dry land for hours, a forked stick in his hands, until he felt a pull from the earth. Twice, he led them to underground springs, and the whole ranch worked together to dig deep, life-saving wells. Sarah, the girl from the sweatshop, became a brilliant organizer, managing the younger children in efficient work crews that tended the gardens and cared for the chickens with meticulous care. Little Anna, now only 9, discovered she had a gentle, healing touch with the sick animals, often sleeping in the barn to nurse a struggling calf. But it was Rebecca who was the heart and soul of the fight. She was everywhere at once. She negotiated ruthless deals with feed suppliers, her sharp mind wringing every last cent of value from their dwindling finances. She managed the brutal logistics of moving the remaining herd from one patch of scrub grass to another. And somehow, through it all, she kept everyone's spirits up, her calm confidence a shield against the creeping despair. One blistering August evening, as the sun finally set, leaving the sky a bruised purple, Rebecca sat on the porch with Martha, too tired to even speak. Martha reached out and took Rebecca's hand. It was rough and calloused, the hand of a field worker, not a young lady. "I need to tell you something, Rebecca," Martha said, her voice soft. "When Samuel first brought you home, I thought I wanted a daughter. I was a selfish woman, wanting a little doll to dress up and fuss over." She squeezed Rebecca's hand. "But what I got, it was so much more than that." "What do you mean?" Rebecca asked, her voice raspy with fatigue. "I got a partner," Martha said, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "I got a leader, someone who could carry on what we've built here long after Samuel and I are gone." She looked at Rebecca with an expression of profound love and respect. "You've become the heart of this place, Rebecca. These children, they don't just obey you. They look up to you. They would follow you into hell itself." Rebecca felt her own eyes fill with tears. "I learned from the best," she whispered, squeezing her mother's hand. Samuel, who had been standing quietly in the doorway listening, cleared his throat. He stepped out onto the porch. "There's something Martha and I have been discussing," he said, his voice unusually formal. "We think it's time to make it official." Rebecca looked from him to Martha, confused. "Make what official?" "We want to make you a full partner in this ranch," Samuel announced. "An equal partner, equal shares in everything. The land, the cattle, the profits, and the decisions." Rebecca's eyes widened. She was speechless. "Pa, I don't know what to say." "Say yes," Martha urged, her face beaming. "You've earned it 10 times over, my dear." "But what about when you have children of your own someday?" Rebecca stammered. "The ranch should go to them." Samuel and Martha exchanged a long, meaningful look. It was Martha who answered, her voice gentle but firm. "Rebecca," she said, reaching out to cup her cheek. "You are our child. You and David and Marcus and Sarah and all the others we've helped raise. They are our legacy. This ranch, it isn't just about blood family anymore. It's about chosen family." Tears were now streaming freely down Rebecca's face. In the twilight, surrounded by the 2 people who had saved her, and who she had saved in return, she felt a sense of belonging so powerful it almost brought her to her knees. "Yes," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "Yes, I accept." 10 years later, in the autumn of 1903, the McKinnon Ranch for Displaced Youths was a name known throughout the state of Texas. It was more than a ranch, it was an institution. What had started as a desperate act of a childless couple had grown into a revolutionary social experiment. Rebecca, now 29, stood before a crowd of well-dressed dignitaries from the state capitol in Austin. They had come to see what the newspapers were calling the McKinnon miracle. Over the past 15 years, the ranch had taken in and transformed the lives of more than 60 children. Most had gone on to become successful teachers, business owners, skilled craftsmen. 2 had even become lawyers. "Ladies and gentlemen," Rebecca addressed the crowd, her voice confident and clear, "what you see here is not a miracle, and it is not the result of any one person's vision. It is simply what happens when you give children what they need most. Not just food and shelter, but education, opportunity, and the knowledge that someone, somewhere, believes in them." The governor of Texas himself, Joseph Sayers, was in attendance. He was a tall, imposing man with a thick mustache and a keen, intelligent gaze. He stepped forward. "Miss McKinnon," he said, his voice booming. Then he noticed the simple gold band on her finger and smiled. "Or should I say Mrs. McKinnon?" "It's Mrs. Harrison now, actually," Rebecca replied with a warm smile. She had married James Harrison, the younger brother of their foreman, Tom Bradley, the previous year. He was a kind, steady man who understood and supported her life's work completely. "But the work continues, Governor, regardless of my name." The governor nodded, impressed. "We have read the reports, but we had to see for ourselves. They say your success rate is unbelievable, that over 90% of the children who have lived on this ranch have gone on to become productive, law-abiding citizens." "That's correct," Rebecca said. "But I think the real measure of our success is something different." She gestured to the crowd around them. Mixed in with the politicians and philanthropists were dozens of young men and women, her former children who had returned for this special day. "The real success is that these young people learned that they had value. They learned that they had choices. And most importantly, they learned that they had the power to help others in turn." A handsome, well-dressed young man of 22 stepped forward. It was Marcus Thompson. "Governor," he said, his voice steady and strong, "I was 12 years old when I came here. I was an angry, bitter thief who trusted no one. I was sure that every adult in the world was just trying to cheat me. Mrs. Harrison, Rebecca, she didn't try to change me. She just showed me there was another way to live. She gave me a chance." He stood a little straighter. "Today, I own my own freight business in Houston. I have 10 men working for me, and 2 of them are boys I took in from the same orphanage I came from." Another young woman, Sarah Martinez, now a school teacher in a small town nearby, added her voice. "They taught us that our past did not have to define our future. But more than that, they showed us, by their example, how to give back to the world instead of just taking from it." The governor was visibly moved. He turned to Samuel, who stood beside Martha, his face a mask of quiet pride. "And you believe this model could be replicated elsewhere, Mr. McKinnon?" "We believe so, Governor," Samuel said, his voice still strong at 58. "But it requires more than just money. It requires people who are committed. People who are willing to see each child as an individual, with their own hopes and fears, not just another mouth to feed. The key," Martha added, her voice full of warmth, "is treating them as family, not as charity cases." As the day's festivities wound down, Rebecca found a quiet moment to herself, standing on the porch, looking out over the ranch that had become her life's work. Her husband, James, came up beside her and slipped a comforting arm around her waist. "Proud of what you've built?" he asked softly. "Proud of what we've all built together," she corrected him with a smile. She rested her head on his shoulder. Sometimes I think about what would have happened if Pa hadn't been at that auction in Galveston that day." "But he was," James said simply, "and you were brave enough to trust him." Rebecca nodded. Her gaze fell upon a group of the current residents who were helping clear away the refreshment tables. Among them were 2 brand-new arrivals, a brother and sister, who had been orphaned just a week before when their parents died in a mining accident. Their faces were still etched with grief and fear. "Do you think we're really making a difference, James?" she asked, her voice suddenly full of a familiar doubt. "A real, lasting difference?" "Look around you, Rebecca," he replied, his voice firm. 63 children who have better lives because of this place. Some of them, like Marcus, are now out there helping other children. If that's not making a difference, then I don't know what is." That evening, long after the dignitaries had departed, the entire ranch family gathered for their traditional Sunday dinner. The big dining room was packed and noisy. Current residents, from the newest arrivals to the oldest veterans, permanent family members like David the blacksmith, and several former residents who had stayed for the night. Samuel stood up to address the group, as he had done countless times before, but tonight his words carried a special weight. 18 years ago, he began, his voice thick with emotion, I bought a 14-year-old girl at a labor auction because something in her eyes told me she deserved better. I thought I was saving her. He looked down the long table at Rebecca, his daughter, his partner, his pride. But the truth is, she was saving me, and Martha, and in the end, all of us. He looked around at the sea of faces, young and old, all of them part of this strange and wonderful family they had created. What Rebecca built here proves something important. It proves that family isn't just about blood. It's about love. It's about commitment. It's about choosing to care for each other and passing on the best of what we've learned. Then Rebecca stood up. And it proves, she added, her voice ringing with passion, that no child is too damaged, too angry, or too lost to be saved. Sometimes, all it takes is for one person to be willing to see their potential instead of their problems. Marcus, the former street thief, now a respected businessman, raised his glass. "To the McKinnon Ranch," he called out. "To chosen family and to second chances." "To second chances!" The entire room chorused, their voices rising as one. A quarter of a century after that fateful day in Galveston, Rebecca sat in the familiar leather chair in the ranch study. The room was the same, but now it was she who was the teacher. Across the desk sat a sharp-eyed 13-year-old girl named Elena, a recent arrival who had a mind for numbers that reminded Rebecca of herself. "So," Rebecca said, pointing to a column of figures in the ledger, "if we sell the herd in Kansas City instead of Fort Worth, we make an extra $3.50 per head. But what do we have to factor in?" Elena's brow furrowed in concentration. "The extra shipping costs on the railroad," she said, "and the cost of feeding them for 2 extra days." "Exactly," Rebecca said with a proud smile. "And what does that tell us about timing?" "That we have to watch the market reports every day," Elena recited, "and only ship when the price difference is big enough to cover the extra costs and still make a bigger profit." "You're learning fast," Rebecca praised her. Elena looked up from the ledger, her expression serious. "Mrs. Harrison, can I ask you something?" "Of course, Elena." "Why do you do all this?" she asked. "Taking in kids like me, I mean. You and Mr. Harrison, you have your own family. You could have a much easier life without all of us." Rebecca leaned back in her chair and considered the question. It was the same question she had asked Samuel all those years ago. "Because someone gave me a chance when I needed it most, Elena," she said softly, "and I learned that the best way to honor that kind of gift is to pass it on to someone else." Elena nodded thoughtfully. Do you think I could learn to run a place like this someday?" Rebecca's smile was warm and genuine. "Elena," she said, "I think you could learn to do anything you set your mind to." She leaned forward again. "But first, let's master these cattle calculations." As they turned back to their work, Rebecca felt a profound sense of peace. Outside the window, she could hear the laughter of children playing in the yard. She could hear the rhythmic clang of the hammer on anvil from David's blacksmith shop, and she could hear the distant voice of her mother, Martha, now in her 70s but still spry, calling everyone in for supper. The girl who was sold for $50 had become the woman who had saved hundreds. The hollow empire Samuel McKinnon had built for an heir he never had was now a thriving kingdom, a beacon of hope, with a legacy that would stretch on for generations. It was a legacy built not on blood, but on something far stronger. As the Texas sun set, painting the hills in shades of gold and crimson, Rebecca closed the heavy ledger. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new children to save, new battles to fight. But tonight, there was just the warmth of home, the comfort of family, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing that a single act of kindness, a single choice to see the humanity in another person's eyes, could truly change the world. If you were moved by the story of the McKinnon Ranch and believe in the power of second chances, don't forget to like this video and hit that subscribe button. Join our community and help us share more stories that matter. Thank you for watching.